Good morning to you. It's good to be back speaking with you, even though it's a bit one-sided. Although I had two phone calls this week, one from Joan and one from Chris, wanting to make sure that I was okay after my thought for the day last Monday. If you remember, I spoke about how angry and how hurt I was, and that was prompted by the death of George Floyd and the issue of racism. Those calls meant a lot to me, and also what meant a lot is that both promised to keep praying for me and for that situation. And I just thank you, Joan and Chris. That was really kind of you both. Thank you. But today I want to tell you about a situation in my family that has elements of all sorts of things: longing, searching, holding love, disconnectedness and connectedness, forgiveness and freedom. And you might detect other things in it as well. It's a long story that I'm going to have to simplify a bit, because otherwise you could be watching this for hours. Anyway, here goes. It starts with me overhearing my grandmother's prayers at night. My paternal grandma, Sarah Jane, who I loved so much, and was just this wonderful woman. She was Hull born and bred, and we used to stay with her when we went up there. And I remember I was about 12, I think. I was in the room next to hers, and I heard her praying, as she always did every night. And she would pray for the whole family by name, and then at the end of the prayers she prayed for someone called Vera, that she was safe and happy wherever she was. Now, I didn't like to sort of directly let her know that I'd been listening to her prayers, because she was quite a private lady in many respects. And so I asked my dad, I said, do you know who Vera is? And he told me that she was the daughter of my grandfather's brother, Jack. And he was the rogue of the family, and he was ostracised from most of them. He'd married a woman from Tamworth called Ellen, and they'd had a child called Vera. And he told me that Ellen had died from a broken heart because of Jack's womanizing and drinking. In my family research later, I found out that she'd actually died of TB, but I'm sure a broken heart would have contributed to that as well. And after her death, Jack had either given away or sold Vera to a couple when he moved a young woman of 17 into the house. And I was intrigued, and this knowledge that my dad had given me enabled me to open up a conversation with my gran. And she told me that she was always concerned about what happened to Vera. She just wanted to know that she was safe and well, and that she was happy wherever she was, because she'd had such a difficult start in life. She'd been neglected by Jack. And she told me a few stories about Jack, but she also told me about what a beautiful woman Ellen was, and that she didn't deserve that to happen to her. And every time over the years I visited my gran, we would talk about Vera, and she would reiterate her wish to know what had happened to her. And we'd look at photographs that she got of Ellen, not of Vera, but of Ellen, her mom, and Jack, her father. And she continued, and we continued this discussion right up until her death at the age of 87. And then after that, I used to have the same conversations with my dad, because he took up the baton, wanting to know what had happened to Vera. And when my dad died, I decided to try and find Vera. I'd been researching my family history for a long time and had found family back to the 1600s, but no trace of Vera. Now, I didn't know what her surname would be. You know, she would have had probably an adopted surname. She may have got married since then. I didn't know what area she would be in, and I had little to go on. I persevered. I did things like had letters in local Hull newspapers and so on. I persevered because I wanted to do this for my grandma and my dad, even though they were no longer with us. But little did I know that at the same time, Vera and her husband were searching for members of her birth family, the Braithwaites. And to cut a very long story short, in about 4 years of searching, I came across a little clue that her name might now be Gray. I mean, I could go into the detail of that, but I won't. And then by way of a man in Spain and then a man in Brooklyn, New York, I came into contact with Vera's daughter. And I sent her an email and told her who I was and whether her mum would be interested in hearing from me. She replied straight away, and she said that her mum would definitely want contact and asked me for my telephone number. I came home one day and there was a message on my answering machine from a lady with a Yorkshire accent, sounding just like my grandma. It was Vera, and she would ring the next day. And I thought, she's still in Hull. She's still got that accent, she's still in Hull. And I waited for her call, and when she rang, I recognised that familiar accent that has always meant so much to me. And two things she told me that day was, firstly, she didn't live in Hull, she didn't live in Yorkshire, she lived in Australia and had been there since 1958. And the second thing she told me was her one ambition in life was to touch the hand of someone from her birth family, the Braithwaites. How could I refuse that desire, that need on her part? So, I think it was the following year, 2 years ago now, Mavroy and I found ourselves on a plane on that long trip to Australia, Sydney, Australia, where we were met by Vera's son Dave and his wife. And we stayed a couple of days in Sydney, or just outside Sydney, and then took a long drive to a place in the bush where we would meet Vera and her husband. Then we'd take a long drive up there, and we found, I'm getting lost here, where are we? They rented a place for us, that's right, in the bush, so that we could all stay together. And it was there that we would meet Vera and her husband, Tony. And we arranged to meet in a car park by the riverside. And Vera and Tony had travelled up from Melbourne, where they lived, and they were there just before us. And so we got there, and I got out of the car and I walked to their car, and Vera got out of the car and just held onto both of my hands and just gazed into my face. She was holding my hands like this and just looking at me, and she continually saying, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. And we had a wonderful time. It was as if we'd known each other for many, many years, and in some ways certainly we had. Certainly I had through my grandmother. And I'd got photographs of her mum, which she'd never seen. She couldn't remember her mum at all, and what her mum looked like or anything like that. So that was something special for her. And during that time we talked on the veranda, sitting outside in the Australian sun, about her history, and I told her all about my gran and my dad and how they'd never forgotten her, and how we'd talked about her all through the years and wondered how she was. Well, thankfully, she'd had a good childhood. She was adopted by a wonderful couple who'd been told that they couldn't have children, but then they went on to have sisters for Vera. And I've met those sisters as well. They still live in Hull. And one day I was just sitting quietly with her on the veranda, and she was lost in thought for some time. We weren't saying anything. See how silence sometimes is important. And suddenly she said, I can forgive him now. I'm at peace with him now. And she meant her dad, Jack. And at that minute, a healing and a circle had been completed. My gran and my dad never let Vera go. They never forgot about her, forever concerned about her welfare. And she'd been held in a way in love. And in turn, Vera had been searching for peace about her origins, about the rejection that she'd suffered, about being disconnected. And she'd had no idea that she was, all those years, she'd been held in that way. And that's God's way too, isn't it? He never lets us go. Wherever we travel, whatever we do, good or bad, however we feel, whatever we might believe at any one time, he never lets us go. And like that circle that was completed for Vera, we can rest in the ever-encompassing circle of God's love for us. We can, because he will never fail us. And if you're lost right now, if you're feeling lost, trust that you will be found, just like Vera was. Now, there's so much more I could tell you about this, so many nuances and spin-offs and so on, and maybe I'll tell you another time. And I continue, I speak regularly with Vera and Tony, and I've put her in contact with the widow of a brother she didn't know about, and I'm so privileged to be in contact with her and Tony and her son and daughter-in-law and daughter, and I just hope that I've pleased my grandma and my dad. You know, you take care of yourselves, and I can't wait to see you all again. Love to you all, and God bless.